Welcome back. Let's discuss economic matters now. Following new developments in both the global and domestic economy now, the National Assembly has approved President Muhammadu Buhari's request for an amendment to the 2022 fiscal framework on which the 2022 budget is based. The amendment raised the deficit in the federal government's budget by 965.4 billion naira to 7.35 trillion naira, representing over 3% of the GDP. Now, the adjustments in the 2022 fiscal framework includes an increase in the projected oil price benchmark from $62 per barrel to $72 per barrel, a reduction in projected oil production volume from 1.833 million barrels per day to 1.6 million barrels per day. There's also an increase in the estimated provision for petrol subsidy by 442.22 billion naira now, taking the total budget for petrol subsidy now to 4 trillion naira, which is, of course, a record. And well, the government says the increment in the Appropriation Act will be financed by new borrowings from the domestic market. Now, what exactly is the implication of these adjustments for the ordinary Nigerians, and what does it mean for the country's economy, particularly at this time when revenue generation is a major challenge? Joining me to analyze this further is Professor Ken Ige, who is an economist. He joins us from Abuja. Prof, thank you very much for joining us on the program. You look at this adjustments now made by the National Assembly, of course, at the request of the president, but pushing up, of course, driving up the total budget and, of course, driving up the deficit, which has always been a concern. What's your take on all of this?
Well, it's very interesting times ahead. It's just a pity that whilst we have the highest oil price for quite a long time, since 2014, getting as much as $130 million per barrel and then coming down and operating in that range. We are even tightening our belt because we're just not having accretion of that increase into the reserves, and we're not seeing it show up in our foreign reserves or excess crude account, and the troubles around the petroleum subsidy is just increasing. The stress is increasing to the fact that we are now not talking about 1.2 trillion, we're not talking about 4 trillion, like over 3 trillion subsidy. But be it as it may, it's necessary that the budget is adjusted to face the reality. And I'm happy that it's done very, very quickly. The fact of the matter is that we are going to have to continue to fasten our belt until probably when we have the Dangote refinery come on stream, and some of the modular refineries come on stream as well.
But you look at, because that's one of the biggest worry, the 4 trillion naira now for petrol subsidy. You look at that amount, just as you have said, it's actually huge, unprecedented. You tend to get the impression that at some point we may have to borrow to even fund the subsidy itself.
Well, that's provided for in the revised fiscal framework. There will be more borrowing, and also there's provision for increased debt service of about 76 billion. The borrowing, of course, means that we're going to be looking for a 7.35 trillion deficit, which now takes us to the edge. The Fiscal Responsibility Act holds us down to 4% deficit, and now we're at 3.99 deficit. But as I said, it is going to be a very interesting time ahead.
And, the issue of borrowing has been a very big talking point. What alternative do you think we have? If we choose not to borrow, what exactly could we do to raise money, to fund the budget?
There are several things. There are several things we can do. The narrative around our debt sustainability is that is all debt finance, borrowing. Everybody knows what we owe, but not many people know what we own as a country, as federal government. So we need to begin to shift that balance to equity-based financing. In other words, we should be issuing more equity instruments, which means we have to be in a position to sweat our assets and then get those assets to generate revenue. And the minister is going in that direction, because last week we launched the transition team for the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, which is going to bring more momentum on and more satellite on the activities of the federal owned projects. And there are many of them. They run in hundreds. So we're now looking to see how we are creating a world-class asset management company that will look at those companies, check out their status in the CAC, then dress them up, look at what you could do about valuating those companies, because valuation is the key. I'll give you an example. Saudi Arabia needed to borrow $25 billion. They didn't go to World Bank or IMF or any of the multilateral development agencies. They simply said, look, Saudi Aramco, can anybody tell me the value of this company? And when they valued it and the valuation was returning well over 1.5 trillion, they said, oh, goodness me, I didn't know I have that kind of money. Please, I want 5%. So they floated and got 5%. And that was all that they did. So in a similar way, if you were to say to NNPC now, right, we have now changed NNPC to a private company. Now I want to know the assets, the value of NNPC. If you do the valuation of NNPC, even as a going concern, based on 1.7 million barrels a day, you are going to be coming in around 20 trillion naira. Then if you add its gas, add the physical assets, you may well be heading to about 30 trillion or more.
But these assets you're talking about, how attractive are they? And I mean, are they assets that investors will be willing to invest in? And in terms of the policy environment as well, wouldn't we have a situation where investors will be very wary to take up some of these assets? Not
for NNPC. I mean, just because NNPC incorporated,
not just for NNPC,
you saw
of course.
Africa just came with $5 billion. Not to talk of, if you float this company in the capital market, I can tell you the oil companies, the big boys in the they will bite your arm off. And if government says, all right, I want to sell 49% of this company, it could easily rake in 15 trillion or even more just by floating the company. And then what then happens is that better, more seasoned professionals will come forward. This company will now be run as a world-class company. I cannot have, okay, look at LNG. LNG is owned by all the oil companies and federal government. And because they all know what they know, you couldn't be complaining of theft of oil. You couldn't be complaining of all these governance issues. They are returning profit to the oil companies and government of Nigeria. But you should do that for NNPC so that you get world-class management of this company, and then the assets will be turned around. Look at the marginal oil fields. Look at they've got huge assets. And then when the oil companies buy into this company, and the big companies and individuals like you and me buy into this company, there will be pressure for them to perform. And I think that is the critical juncture where you can have a game changer like you've never seen before.
Okay, let's talk about the reductions now that were made. We saw a reduction, for instance, in federal government investment now in the upstream sector. We saw a cut there for federally funded upstream projects now, a cut of about 200 billion naira. NDDC, of course, we saw a cut as well, 13.46 billion. You also have another cut now in the Northeast Development Commission, 6.30 billion naira. And one that people have also been talking about a lot is UBEC, where there was a cut of 23.16 billion. And then I think there's another one, yes, the Basic Healthcare Fund, a reduction now by 11.58 billion naira. You look at all of these reductions, what do you make of them?
Well, they are very, very difficult areas to reduce because you need investment, you need upstream investment for you to continue to guarantee supply of the crude. Many countries are not investing in upstream because of the fear that by 2030, there will be less use of petrol and electric cars will take over. And because they are not investing, then the prices of crude are going up because they are now seeing a likely decline in the supply. So that is why it's happening. And then for us to now start cutting down on upstream investment is just not the right time to do this. Then secondly, all these areas that we mentioned are statutory transfer areas. And they are all so critical that you push them into statutory transfer. And I think we should be getting the money from fuel subsidy. That's where we should be getting that money from, and not so much from this very, very lean area. And don't forget, apart from cutting them, you still don't guarantee that they're going to get substantial amount of this capital project, because those releases on the capital projects are the last in the list. In other words, in the pecking order, the defense goes first, debt service goes second, then you have payment of salaries of staff. They begin to come down. You finish all the recurrent expenditure. By December, all of them will be at 100%. But the capital expenditures will be struggling around 50 by December. So you need to start extending the spend to March next year or June next year for you to actually improve. And that's where the jobs lie, in those capital expenditure. So the way to cut this down is to reduce the money spent on petroleum subsidy, because you don't subsidize consumption, you subsidize production.
And when you look at the total amount we're spending on petrol subsidy, compare that to the budget deficit. That's over half of the budget deficit here. Budget deficit of 7.35 trillion, and then you have a petrol subsidy bill of 4 trillion. I'm just imagining if that petrol subsidy wasn't there in the first place, what this country would have done with this huge amount of money.
You see, I rather would spend 1 trillion of that money subsidizing agriculture, because food is a necessity, clothing is a necessity, shelter is a necessity. They are basic needs without which, as human beings, we cannot survive. You can ride a bicycle, you can walk, take a walk to work. You can deal with transport-related issues, but you can't deal with these three things. You can't go around naked. You can't live without a roof over your head. Neither will you stay a whole day without feeding. So those are the areas that are so basic to life that we need to put resources there.
And the way it is, somehow, you get the impression that the majority of Nigerians want this subsidy to stay, but then they must also understand the implication of retaining this subsidy, because it's costing a lot. Even though the federal government has said this is just going to be on for a while and that by next year it plans to remove subsidy completely, I know it's definitely not going to be an easy thing at all. We don't know for how long the Russia-Ukraine war would last, and we can't for now tell if oil prices will come down. So just imagine if oil prices continue to remain this high by next year. I'm just wondering how easy it would be for the government to take off this subsidy. And if the prices continue to go up, then we might be looking at a subsidy budget of around 5 to 6 trillion.
Well, one thing I would say is, if you look at 4 trillion, which is burnt away in a year, that could actually finance 120 modular refineries. Not even to talk of the fact that we only have license for 75. If we can get 10 solid regular modular refineries to start operating, which will only cost us, because it costs about 35 billion naira to start one, which will cost us less than 400 billion, and this is money that they have to pay back, then there will be no need to import the fuel. They have enough. They have enough in their production capacity, to produce, because it's 220,000 barrels a day each one will produce on that investment of 35 billion, $70 million. So, it's a no-brainer to think that we couldn't lend that money, that small money, to get them started, and then they will repay it over 2 years or 3 years and stop the hemorrhage of transporting this whole thing out and bringing it back. And let me just give you one example of the challenges that we face here. Every month, the central bank expends about $3 billion a month coming into its coffers from crude oil. But then, for the last 1 year, even up till now, they haven't seen a penny come there, simply because of the swap, the crude swap between Nigeria and the companies that refine for us. So what then comes back, we send the crude, what comes back is PMS, and the small change that comes, you can even see that they are not even spending the balance in what's it called, servicing the debt created by subsidy. They are now asking federal government to go and find the money to pay for subsidy.
Exactly. And
at the same time, you are now starving the central bank of dollars that it requires to actually maintain a financial system and forex stability. So where is he getting money from? It has to depend on very lean diaspora transfer. FDI has gone down to less than $700 million. And the transfer, the foreign portfolio investment is melted away. So now government has to now borrow more on dollars to be able to finance the dollar denominated loans, and then provide for the invincibles and imports of raw materials to industry. So it's a very, very difficult situation. And that's why I keep saying, get this company out to the capital market. Let's know its value, and let's get serious investors into this company, and more money will come. And then, both into the coffers of government, and you have more efficiency in the running of these operations.
It's a very tough one, no doubt. Professor Ken Ige, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Well, that's how much we can take on the program this week. We thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye. Enjoy your Easter.